Hello, I'm Chris Flisher, and welcome to Turning of the Wheel, an intelligent, lively discussion on astrology, art, and adventure. Timing is everything, and as the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed. Join me as I explore the current planetary alignments and offer insights for coping with change. Educational, informative, enlightening, the Turning of the Wheel is a welcome pause in your daily swirl of constant change. Through intelligent discourse, inspired guests, and educational segments, I will help to enlighten your knowledge of astrology and guide you to accept change as the great wheel of life turns. Call in with your questions and speak with some of the greatest visionaries in the time-tested practice of astrology. Turning of the Wheel, Astrology, Art, and Adventure with Chris Flisher, each week on Turning of the Wheel podcast. Hello and welcome to Turning of the Wheel. My name is Chris Flisher. As you know, this is a show about astrology, art, and spiritual adventure, and I'm always on and looking for an adventure somewhere. And I stumbled upon a fascinating person the other day while I was trolling the web and looking around and Facebook and stuff. Fascinating guy. He'll be on in a few seconds here to talk with us. I'm going to just let you know about my weekly newsletter, which goes out every Sunday afternoon, about 1:30 in the afternoon. And in there you'll find a couple paragraphs of mundane astrology, talking about where we are in the world today, where we all are in the same swirling planet that we're on. And then from there I break it out into the individual signs. I encourage you all to always read your sun sign as well as your rising sign. Put those two together. You'll get much more accuracy when it comes to astrology and where you're going to be doing in the week to come. So I encourage you to do that. You can find that on my website, chrisflisher.com, or turningofthewheel.com as well. You can get there both, and it's a free service, and I encourage you to look into it. I've got great responses on that. So as I mentioned before, I was out trolling around the web, and I found this fascinating guy. His name is Annand, and he is an astrologer, and we have many things in common. We were both writers. We're both astrologers. He's a musician. He's written novels. He's a Vedic astrologer and a Western astrologer out of Canada. Fascinating a portfolio of information and stuff. I encourage you to check out his websites. One is sextile.com, and the other is Navamsa, Navamsa.com. And he's a Vedic and Western astrologer. We're going to be talking today about the construct of those two forms of thinking and where we look at and how they sort of pair up against each other. So it's great to have you on, Alan. Welcome to the show, Alan Annand.
Hey, Chris, thank you so much for having me on board. This is a thrill. You're my first podcast, man. This is great.
Oh, really? Wow, I'm surprised. For all this time, you haven't had a podcast.
I've been hiding.
Oh, gosh, I don't know how you
Here in
possibly... Up in Canada, yeah. Well, it's interesting because I'm fascinated by, as you know, everybody who knows me knows I love astrology. I've been fascinated by it for years. And I'm curious how you came to astrology, first of all, and then how you came to understand two forms of astrology.
Yeah, well, this goes back quite a while until I guess I was around 24 when I first picked up a book on astrology, and it was Jess Stern's A Time for Astrology. A fantastic little paperback, probably cost $3 in the day. I hate to date myself, but this was 1973. And in that book, it had the kind of a crude ephemeris at the back, the instructions on how to calculate a chart. So I did that, and then right away he started interpreting my own chart. And I was very enthused to read about my own chart, even if only because it said I had the makings to be a writer. And at age 24, freshly out of university, not sure what I was going to do in life, just beginning to write, this was like very comforting words for me to, affirm that, yeah, this maybe was my life path. Aside from, indicating that I was potentially a writer, it also said astrologer as well, too. And at that point, I hadn't really, I just calculated my chart. I hadn't seen any other charts yet. So this was early in the day for that. But after a while, I appreciated that as well, too. And both were reinforcing. And since then, actually, those have been the two major thrusts of my entire life. Between writing and astrology, they're my two major passions. I guess I have a minor passion in music as well, too, but not professional. But writing and astrology are very important for me and both strongly reflected in my chart.
That's fascinating because we really do have quite a bit in common. I'm a writer and an astrologer, and I wrote for music magazines for about 10, 15 years, doing reviews and stuff like that. So my knowledge and history of music goes way back. So it's interesting, we both areas at the same time. So that's kind of fascinating. I was about the same age when I stumbled into astrology, and I had I met a woman where I was working at the time, and she had to start that day, and she was a brand new employee. She asked me if I knew my birth coordinates, and I said I did. I knew when I was born at the time. And then the next day she came back, and here was a perfect stranger And she read me my chart back, and she knew more about me than anybody I had met to that date. And I was about 22 at the same time. So really, really fascinating. It probably was around the same time, 1973, when I think about it, that I had this revelation, and I have been hooked ever since. So it's fascinating. And so you also began, and of course you got certified in that field, and then you went on to study Vedic astrology as well.
Yeah, real quick before we go on to the Vedic astrology, I started, calculating charts on my own using this crude little ephemeris, and then got, better reference books, tables of houses, and better ephemerides, and started doing charts for friends and family and whatever. People said, "Okay, you're studying astrology now. Tell me about myself." Yeah. And I realized, you know what? I'm not ready for that. I don't have a methodology. I'm still just learning. So I thought, if I'm going to be a real astrologer, I should get educated. So I cast about, and there were many organizations at the time offering correspondence courses, and so I ended up with the Faculty of Astrological Studies in England, which was basically a 3-year program. And I went to England for my last year of all that, and wrote 16 hours worth of exams, and got a diploma. And that was then the kind of endorsement I needed. I know not everybody needs that, but I felt I needed to cover all that groundwork, to learn everything, all the techniques that one should know. So this was kind of like boot camp for, Marines.
Yeah, very good idea. Good idea, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so once I had that in hand, then I started practicing as a Western astrologer. And I did that for about 15 years or so, and taught courses, participated in conferences, and so on and so on. But around about, mid-90s, I guess, a girlfriend at the time gave me a book on Vedic astrology. And I had a look at it, and I almost threw it away because I didn't like my chart under conversion. I'm an Aries. In a nutshell, a Leo ascendant, Moon in Sagittarius, and a stellium in Aries. And when I converted, I realized, oh my gosh, I've got Cancer ascendant and Moon in Scorpio, and I almost hurled on the spot. But anyway, I begrudgingly, prepared my chart and studied it, and I realized after a while, you know what, like it or not, this actually described me better. And it emboldened me to, read the rest of the book and start doing all my charts in Vedic mode as well. And actually for about 2 years, every time I saw a client, I prepared 2 charts. Traditionally the one in Western format, and I also did one in Vedic as well too. And I sort of tried to weave both interpretations into every session. And after a while I came to realize, you know what, I think Vedic astrology works for me, and more to the point, it works better for clients as well too. I mean, it's my personal experience, and everything is personal. But for that reason, I eventually dropped Western astrology and converted entirely to Vedic astrology. People say, how can you do that? How can you live without Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto? And I think that's the biggest thing for Western astrology, is they don't know how you can live without those 3 planets. Well, I didn't think I could either, because they all have integral part of a framework in my chart in terms of chart patterns or planetary patterns. But, after a while, you don't miss them. It's made up for by the fact that there are other things in Vedic astrology that give you things to chew on.
Yeah, there's so much richness in the charts. Even Hellenistic astrology only goes out to Saturn as well. And there's so much richness in material there, you really don't need the extra planets. I mean, they add I suppose a certain amount of depth to it, and they add a new angle. But for the most part, you really don't need that. You can get enough information out of those out of the planetary structure out to Saturn, I think, and it is true. I've spoken with many Vedic astrologers, and I'm always amazed at the sense of precision that's there, and the detail that's there, and sort of the it's much richer experience, I think, overall. I've always been frustrated by the language, to be honest. I get bogged down in some of the names and get frustrated in that, but I do intend to study it myself as well someday and go further into it. So it's really admirable that you're able to do that.
Well, the whole language vocabulary thing is really just a step in the ladder. When neophytes or the layman approaches astrology for the first time, they too have to grapple with what we consider a common vocabulary of Western astrology, right? They're talking about trines, aspects, and that's a whole combustion, and that's a whole new language for the layman. So really just moving on to Vedic astrological vocabulary is just, climbing up another rung of the ladder. And when you think about charts without the extra Saturnians, you only have to go back to the 17th century, and one of the greatest astrologers we ever knew, William Lilly, operated absent Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. All of his charts are done with just the planets out to Saturn. The main differences with Western and Vedic astrology, the sidereal zodiac used in Vedic astrology, they're only the visible planets. This notion of planetary periods, which I believe Hellenistic astrology has, as well, although a different system. One thing I'd just like to talk about very briefly, because I was getting into this discussion just the other day with somebody who was laboring over a chart whose birth time was not known. In Western astrology, for instance, if an astrologer doesn't know birth time and therefore can't determine the ascendant, typically what they do is they rotate the chart to a sunrise chart, right? They either calculate the birth for noon and then manually rotate the chart, or they actually calculate the chart for sunrise in order to place the sun at the ascendant. And that's a valid tool, and it's one that Vedic astrologers do as well, but there's something else that Vedic astrologers would do first. In the absence of a birth time, to determine the ascendant itself, if they don't have that, what they will do is calculate a chart for moonrise. And why moonrise rather than sunrise? The moon is a more specific individuator of time.
That makes sense.
The ascendant is in a sign for 2 hours. The moon is in a sign for 2.5 days. The sun is in a sign for a month. So by actually rotating the chart to a moonrise for that day is actually more specific. And many a time we will do this, we Vedic astrologers will do this even when we do have the birth time. Let's say I have an ascendant of a chart, an accurate chart, and I'm laboring over some issue that the client has presented. Will I have children? Or will I be married? Second, will I have children? How many? Etc. And so, you can get hung up on the chart looking at this and trying to figure it out. And you get signals saying yes and no, different litmus tests, right? And it ends up confounding you because you don't know which to say. Very often, then, I will look at what we call Chandra Lagna chart, and that's, buzzword, but it means moon as ascendant chart. And look at that as the next, optional way of looking at a chart. And sometimes that will be the tiebreaker in order to get beyond where you are. It's a useful technique.
I think it's a fascinating. I never heard of it before. I love the idea. It makes complete sense to me because the moon is a much more predominant player in the chart and one you should definitely defer to. I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's dynamic. The Vedic astrology is very moon-centered. I mean, that is just one example. I went to a Vedic astrologer in Montreal many, many years ago, and although I had given him my birth time, he didn't even bother with it. I think he was one of these sort of, village astrologers educated by his mom or dad or whatever, and it was operating kind of simplistically. He had a big ephemeris. He just paged through to that week that I was born. He did the calculation to figure out where the moon was that day, and he prepared a chart with the moon in Scorpio as the ascendant and then interpreted on the basis of that. He didn't even get to my real detailed chart. So Vedic astrologers do that routinely. The other thing that I wanted to say about moon-centeredness is that this whole notion of major and minor planetary periods is all driven by the moon's natal position at birth. For instance, we know the moon is when you're born, the moon is in one sign or another, one of 12 signs, right? In Western astrology, and in Vedic astrology as well, too. But Vedic astrologers recognize sort of below that layer of the 12 signs, they recognize a kind of a sub-zodiac of 12 nakshatras, or, what could be loosely called mansions of the moon, 27 of them, each spanning 13 degrees and 20 minutes of arc. And so it's the position of your natal moon in one or the other of those nakshatras, there are 27 of them, and which are divvied up between 9 planets. The visible 7 planets, plus Rahu and Ketu, the north and south node of the moon, are given big-time importance in Vedic astrology, and they're treated as significantly as they are visible planets. So each one of these 9 planets, if I can use that in quotes, owns one of these 3 nakshatras. And depending on where your moon is at birth and in what portion of that nakshatra, that determines the major period the so-called dasha, or chunk of time in which you were born. And then the whole sequence unfolds directly from that. It's a very interesting, for anybody who's interested in technique, and I've got a degree in math and physics, I'm fascinated by, numbers and harmonics and their analysis and all that stuff. When I studied with the Faculty of Astrological Studies, one of the things, there was a module on harmonics. So John Addy's book on harmonics was part of the curriculum back in the day, and I found that fascinating, although I didn't find it of much utility. Intellectually fascinating, but not particularly useful when it came to interpreting charts. But it really, piqued my interest hugely. And later when I discovered Vedic astrology used harmonics big time, I mean, there are something like 24, maybe almost 30 divisional charts, so-called harmonic charts in Vedic astrology, each of which is dedicated to different departments of life. It becomes a very rich tool for kind of detailed analysis of one subject or another, whatever client is interested in.
That 13 degrees that you mentioned, that 13-degree slice, is the equivalent of the precession of the equinox. Isn't the difference between the Vedic and Western astrology?
No, that 13 degrees, 20 minutes of arc is, if you multiply that 1320 by 27, you'll get 360 degrees of the circle.
Okay.
Yeah, but that's different from, not related to precession. At this era in time, the difference in the two zodiacs is approximately 24 degrees and change.
Oh, 24,
and of course, it's constantly changing, at the rate of, I've forgotten right now, but very, very slowly.
So when we first met, you introduced yourself as an Aries, as am I, and yet that's based on Western astrology. Do you still adhere to that with your belief of Vedic?
I get to be both. Because of that, the degree difference, 24 degrees difference between the two zodiacs. If you were born between the 15th and the 20th of any month, you will remain the same sun sign in both systems. So I'm born on the 16th of April. So my sun is 26 degrees Aries. Even after I subtract the 24 degrees,
you're still in Aries. Yeah.
So it will be for some people.
Right. So you're in the third decade of the in Western astrology.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. It is fascinating. I do believe that precision is there. I have dabbled in Western Vedic astrology a little bit myself. I'm nowhere near expert that you are. I've always been fascinated by the precision. I also love the mathematics that goes behind it all, because it certainly provides logic for where we are and what we're doing. When you look at these mathematical alignments, they are precise, and the closer they are, the more accurate they become, and I've just always been fascinated by that. When you look at predictive astrology, do you defer to Vedic as well, or do you not delve in predictive astrology?
Oh no, in fact, the reason I got into Vedic astrology was because of various tools and techniques available for prediction. After my education in Western astrology, a diploma, 15 years of experience in consulting and whatever, I mean, I always made, solid attempts at predicting things for people. And, sometimes succeeded, sometimes failed. But I always felt like, what's wrong here? I thought I was smart enough to understand astrology. I thought I had a good education. I thought I'd really devoted myself to the practice, put effort into doing this for clients. Why wasn't I better at this? I was frustrated. And I, rather than blame myself, hey, why blame yourself when there's so many other things to blame, right? So I blamed the methodology. And that's why I was open to, I didn't blame, I love astrology in every guise. But that's why I was open to other things. And I know Vedic astrology had a reputation for prediction. And for that reason, I said, okay, let me give this a chance and look into it. Because Vedic astrology uses transits, just like Western astrology does. It does not use progressions, but its system of major and minor periods, the so-called dashas and bhuktis, provide an equivalency, well, more than equivalent to the notion of progressions. A really superior tool, I think, for analyzing periods in life that are, positive, negative, or just plain neutral, as the case may be sometimes. Sometimes your life is going great, sometimes bad, sometimes it's just, all is normal. And Vedic astrology reflects that.
Yeah, that's all part of the ebb and flow of life, anyways, and we always have to be prepared for that. We live in a dualistic world. We're going to have our ups, we're going to have our downs, we're going to have our in betweens. So it's good to know that. And I think it's probably also helpful understanding when to act and when not to act. I think if you are pursuing something of certain richness or of your desire, you want to be able to act when you're supposed to, know when to hold and when to fold, so to speak.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, Western astrology has these three major branches, natal astrology, the analysis of a birth chart and what it can mean for a person's, relationships, career, health, spirituality, all that other stuff that we're so familiar with. There's horary astrology, which we use to address question and answer scenarios of, one or two questions that come about, as independently of a consultation or as part of a consultation. And we have electional astrology, which is, I want to get married. If this marriage is to succeed, when should I do this? So Vedic astrology has all this as well, too. Natal astrology, which they call Jataka. Nothing else to say about that, except it's got more techniques maybe available for digging deeper, scratching beneath the surface of whatever. I mean, if I'm interested in your kids, I can look at your natal chart. I can rotate your chart to the 5th house and treat that as the ascendant for your first child, and then rotate that to the 7th house for your second child and to the 9th house for your third child, and so on. Why rotating 3 more houses each time? Because they are siblings to each other, right?
Right.
Relationships. But then I can do, Vedic astrology has the methodology of prashna, which means basically slice of time. Just another word for horary astrology, question and answer resolution. And then they have the technique of what is called muhurta, which again is equivalent to electional astrology. Choose a time and a date in a period of life when this is right for you. I mean, and there are lots of really simple things. Vedic astrology has got a reputation for being exceedingly complicated. Yes, it does, but there's also great simplicities as well, too. I'll give you a very simple thing. Let's say you want to ask somebody for a favor, whatever that may be. Get the day right first. Do it on a Thursday. Why Thursday? Because that's the day of Jupiter, which represents generosity and largesse. Mm-hmm. Right? If you want to kill somebody, or if you want to punish somebody, do it on Tuesday, because Mars is punitive and violent. If you want to trim trees or put the end to something, you do it on a Saturday, because that represents death and the end of things, and so on and so forth. There's some easy fixes in that way. My teacher's guru, actually, always used to say, get the day right and do it, in the hour before noon, which is, the most potent time of day, and you'll pretty much be halfway there.
Interesting. So do you think you could apply that to any sort of endeavor you were looking at? So if you're looking for a job interview, if you're looking for a house purchase, you want to sign a mortgage, you would do it at 11 o'clock on a certain day?
Yeah, for instance, just get the day right. Let's say if you're signing a contract, that's most likely a Wednesday because it's the day of Mercury and documentation, and do it around 11:30. Look, there are other things involved too. That's like super simple, right?
Right.
But you'd want to look at moon phase and maybe aspects, stuff like that, and other stuff. But there are ways to make it simple, quick and dirty, right? If you need to.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating, and that's good advice to have heard that. It's interesting that this is a very old science, and it's very mathematically driven, and it's precise, and it has all of the accoutrements of what it takes to deliver accuracy, and yet it's so it's been regarded. And I think your comment about Western astrology sort of being entertainment, it has evolved to become entertainment in some ways, that people do look at it that way because it doesn't have quite the precision there. And yet in India and other parts of the world where Vedic astrology is practiced, people are remarkably drawn to it and recognize its precision. Let me dive in there before people start writing me and saying, how dare you call Western astrology entertainment? I think in some applications it has become entertainment,
But at its root, Western astrology, in the hands of a William Lilly, was deeply serious and profound, and many, I could cite many other great astrologers in the Western tradition as well too. But yes, Vedic astrology has got a long history of providing advice and counsel to people, and with this three-part technique: the birth chart, the prashna horary technique, and the muhurta electional technique. Basically, you've got all you need in order to address any issue under the sun that a client comes to see you for. And they do that on a very routine basis.
Mm-hmm. How do you deal with the ethical questions that arise when you're doing an astrology chart? I ask this with any time with people. In other words, supposing you see something happening that appears to be dire, how do you handle that? Do you delve into that, or do you sort of soft step around that?
Well, some people will clearly tell you, or they'll give you indications that they don't want to hear anything bad. And you have to respect that. I mean, you're not a doctor, right? You're not there to make somebody's life miserable. And you could be wrong. Hey, we know we could be wrong. So it's very dangerous. But yet, you'll still get people say, I'll hear anything. Tell me anything, good, bad, or indifferent, or whatever. I'm prepared to hear that. And in that context, yes, I will talk about things that will be serious and maybe involve illness or death, but not about the person themselves. I mean, I've only done that in 3 instances, and ethically, I knew that I was in protected territory. One was a person who'd led a full spiritual life. She had an objective view on all this. She simply wanted to know, how much longer on this earth will I live? And in that context, with her maturity and her spiritual approach, I knew I was safe to do that. Another was a client who, and it wasn't about her death, it was about her brother's. She was elderly. She couldn't afford to go to England in more than one trip. She had to have a very good sense of when her brother was going to die. And over 3, successive iterations, first I said this season, then I said this month, and then I said go this week. And actually it worked out just as predicted. And one of the things I'm most impressed myself. But I don't very often get to do that. But the point is, it was a very structured kind of context in which
I think it's applicable. I think that's a very appropriate use of astrology in that regards, because it does give you that timing element that is so vital, and it allows you to hone it in, which of course is a fascinating revelation in and out of itself. I mean, you must have just this is what I find when I do charts for people. I'm always amazed, and I always make sure not to. I don't want to know anything about them before I get them. I just need the 3 pieces, and I want to go from there. I want it to be a pure, genuine experience where I know nothing about them, and I just speak for 45, 50 minutes about what I see. A stream of consciousness completely off the top of my head, what I can see going on in the chart, and then I wait for their response afterwards. And invariably, it comes back as, oh my God, how do you know that? So when you have that revelation, it's constantly reaffirming, it's constantly validating for us. And I find it to be a very rewarding experience in that regard.
I approach things pretty much the same way. I always say to people at the outset, look, I'm going to talk to you now for quite a while. I might be wrong, and I'm prepared to be wrong, but for the most part, I think I'll ring a number of bells on all this, because it's the process and the technique that delivers this. And so I go through all that and then get their feedback and then modify or modulate as required. Something you said earlier I wanted to comment upon, the difference between Western and Vedic astrology. I know a lot of Western astrologers kind of dislike the notion of Vedic astrology because it seems too fatalistic, as if everything was written and predetermined. And on that score, I'd just like to comment. A lot of Western astrologers say it's about what you want. But for me, that's, you can make what happen what you want. The chart is full of possibilities. Yeah, well, that's a bit of a Tony Robbins kind of philosophy, which says, you know what, if you want it badly enough, you too can be married, can have children, can be a millionaire. But is that true? It's not true. No matter how much you want, that may not happen at all. And what's that about then? That's about karma. And so Vedic astrology recognizes karma. I mean, the whole chart is karma, really. But there are distinctions in karma. There's what we call drid karma or adrid karma, meaning fixed or unfixed karma. And when you look at a chart, sometimes it could overwhelm you with how beautiful it is, let's say from a spiritual or a health or an intellectual point of view, Or you could look at another chart and you could be overwhelmed about how troubled it is for relationships or health or psychology or whatever the case may be. Why are you thrilled or overwhelmed? Because you see more than one thing in that chart telling you the same message, right? One swallow doth not a spring make. My teacher's guru always used to say, if you see one thing, it means nothing. If you see two things, that's 2 points, you can connect a line, right? And you may have a thesis, but if you see 3 things that connect 3 points in a line that goes in one direction, now you have a line of thought or inquiry or a thread of karma. And then you may proceed on that basis to, talk more about what you think this is going to be. But you have to see evidence of it. And speaking of evidence, that's why I'm a big user now of palmistry as well, too. My teacher, Hart Defoe, in many of his classes always said, I'm teaching mostly astrology, but be forewarned, you should not allow yourself to be a one-trick pony. Even within astrology, you must learn natal astrology, horary astrology, electional astrology, be able to, reach into that toolkit, use it in that way. But more than that, you need other tools and techniques. Learn a little bit about Ayurveda so that when you see a person at first, you recognize their dosha, vata, pitta, kapha. That will inform you about basic personality to some degree. Learn palmistry, especially palmistry. And I was so thrilled after I took a palmistry course with him, and then another one later in more detail. And I have used palmistry every day since then with every client I have ever met. It is wonderful, and it provides corroboration and clues and further insights that dovetail with things in the chart, and they provide that extra information where you now see multiple things, whether it's the numerology of that person's name, their appearance, the first part of their body that they touch when they sit down in front of you for your consultation, and their chart and their palmistry. The more you know, the better. And I know some Western astrologers function that way with the use of tarot, I Ching, or other things like that. So, I'm preaching to the converted in some respects.
You need a supplemental thing to go along with it to sort of enrich in your experience. There's no question about it. We're speaking today with Alan Annand, and his websites are sextile.com and Navamsa, Navamsa. We're going to take a quick break and come back in a few minutes. I encourage you to check out his website. He's an astrologer, Western and Vedic. He's a mystery writer and has a wealth of material out there that you can look into. His websites are sextile.com, and just like the aspect in astrology, and Navamsa, Navamsa, I encourage you to look at them both, and we'll be right back in a few seconds, so hang in there. What is your destiny? Where are you going? What is your real purpose? Do you know? Do you want to know? Of course you do. It's your duty to yourself. We are all here for a reason, and we all have great potential. Discover all of this and more with a professional astrology reading. My name is Chris Flisher, and I can help you. Discover your strengths and work on your weaknesses, and live your life to its fullest capacity. Based on your birthday, birthplace, and birth time, an authentic astrology reading will allow you to live your life to the fullest and reveal your true purpose. Only real astrology can give you real information. It is your destiny, and it is your path. Write me at chris@chrisflisher.com and book a reading today, or call me at 978-393-1036. That's 978-393-1036. www.chrisflisher.com.
Astrology is the science of spirit, and it can serve as an invaluable aid in making the difficult choices in life and seeking truth in all the directions we choose. It holds the potential to allow each of us to evolve to our highest potential. It is the logic of the universe, the code of existence, and the pathway to true wisdom. It is our duty to draw from it the instructions for our lives and to live them to our fullest potential. As the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed.
As the world shrinks and our barriers come down, Diverse cultures are striving for harmony, balance, and peace. To ease the transition, we need to expand with color, light, and tolerance. Now, you can become a global citizen and embrace the color and clear spirit with the divine artwork of the mandala. Mandalas are a timeless artistic offering for creating unity, harmony, and peace. My name is Chris Flisher, and I've spent years creating mandalas, and they are now available online at www.turningofthewheel.com. Come and experience the world of color, form, and function with t-shirts, coffee mugs, note cards, and limited edition prints. These vibrant, lively paintings and products express optimism, oneness, and spiritual balance for all who use them. www.turningofthewheel.com. That's www.turningofthewheel.com. And enter a world of possibility and color. Okay, we're back. Welcome back in Turning of the Wheel. We're talking today with Alan Annand, and he's got a wonderful set of knowledge, a wide portfolio of diversity, but he's a Western astrologer, a Vedic astrologer, an author, a writer, and he's written several books, one of which was first got me sort of started on pursuing him as a guest, which was his book on Scorpio rising, which I found to be an interesting. He's sort of a mystery crime writer, and this sort of fits right in with that into that neighborhood of crime, especially when you think of the Scorpios. At least that's how I envisioned them, and so I found that to be interesting. And so, tell us a little bit about that. I mean, I think if you think about astrology as a foundational tool for writing a book, it is brilliant if you think about it, because you've got all the characteristics, you've got a structure already there in place for you, especially when it comes to characters, plot, line, setting, narration, the whole thing is all there. So it really is very natural, and I'm surprised more people haven't written using astrology as their focal point and as through the lens for which they look. And I'm curious how you came to that.
Well, there's here's the thing. Astrologers are natural sleuths and investigators anyway. Mm-hmm. I mean, look at what we do. Right. We take a two-dimensional diagram and we try to read into that a 4D life, right? Mm-hmm. A fleshed out person with personality and character and a timeline for many of these situations. So, I've always been intrigued by mysteries. When I was young, I read a very steady diet of mysteries throughout my life. And when I started as a writer, I approached mysteries as being, the best medium for me, because it's what I like to read, therefore what I would like to write. And it's very challenging, the whole creation of a mystery, a puzzle, which, you try to baffle the reader as they go through it. Anyway, astrology, I thought, was, a great tool for helping one out. So this idea first came to me one day sitting in an astrology class with my teacher, Hart Defoe, and I was, I'm constantly daydreaming when I shouldn't be, despite being attentive, and I was thinking to myself, wow, imagine if he was a private investigator, what could he do? Armed with all the information that he has available to him. And so, I got this idea, why not create a character who is, embodied with these various skills, a little bit of me, a little bit of heart, a little bit of, some other, admirable sleuth types, and build in lots of, a bit of violence and mayhem and action and adventure and intrigue of some kind or another, but also to weave in, some spirituality, courtesy of his guru, little nuggets of wisdom tossed in here and there from the Vedas to kind of inform the situation and to make it more than just an Ed McBain kind of, tough guy mystery. And my hero does get involved in, martial arts, and he plays a guitar, and but he knows his subject thoroughly, and he's a guy who's upstanding and moral, and he's on the path of Dharma. And the role of Dharma is to correct wrongs and set things right. So that's his purpose. So I wrote this first book, Scorpio Rising, because my lead character, villainess, had Scorpio rising. And I wove this in a kind of a strangers on a train kind of mystery, but basically a three-way. So three strangers, not strangers, three people who knew each other, all going to three different cities in order to kill significant others while they were out of town and having perfect alibis. Pretty complicated, and especially spread across continental United States. And so it starts with my my hero's client having his sister mugged fatally, and the mystery starts there, and it leads to more. So after doing that book, I thought, wow, I really enjoyed doing that. I had a lot of fun. I took a break writing another sort of traditional mystery, and then I came back and wrote another book called Felonious Monk. And again, same lead character, play on words there. Now involving, a death on an ashram in Vermont, and dovetailing with some, a string of unsolved murders of Asian women in New York. And it leads to, a revelation of a theft of a golden Buddha from a temple in Thailand. Well, so, here now I'm just honoring, Revenue Canada's demand for proof that some of your travels, which you've claimed as tax-deductible expenses, are now actually being worked into my novels. So I went to Thailand one year, many years ago, and was fascinated by the spirituality of the place. It turned into a kind of a temple tour. But, boy, I gathered about a novel out of local color, which I wove into this particular novel because, as it's turned out, these three novels have all involved, significant amounts of travel. So Felonious Monk, in a way, my hero at some point has to go to Thailand to tie up some loose ends. And then my third novel, Soma County, set in California, entails a big trip into India, where I went as well too at one point. And again, a whole lot of local color involved there, lots of action, lots of intrigue, and astrology, palmistry, Ayurveda, numerology, the Vedas, wisdom of the guru, all woven throughout here as seamlessly as I could do it. I'm quite proud of these books, and I'm getting great feedback from people as well too. So,
well, it's quite an accomplishment. I think to be able to use astrology as a foundation is wonderful because you get so much insight into human character. You see so much there. It's easy to pull on those strange little quirks that you can pick up through the astrology charts and what the individuals are. It's hysterical. I love the idea of the Felonious Monk. That's a great play on words. I've always gotten a chuckle out of that. I love to play with words myself. You've got another one out that's just recent too, Al Quebeca.
Yeah, that's a more traditional mystery set in Montreal. That's, basically, call it a police procedural. It's a female homicide cop that investigates a hit-and-run accident in the dead of winter. And as she scratches below the surface, she discovers a terrorist cell in Montreal. You maybe don't know, but there's a huge population of Arabic origin people in Montreal. And I don't mean that, of course, to cast aspersions upon many good Muslims throughout North America and in Canada. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But there is a backdrop there's a population there. And of course, with any population, when it's sizable, you can have the percentage of the radicalized, which we've seen, in many places, Minneapolis, for example, in the U.S. and in other places. I'm actually just finishing off another book in that series. Or I say series, it's only a series of 2 at this point. But that same character, another police procedural. And I'm now debating whether I might write yet a fourth in what I call my New Age Noir series, featuring this Vedic astrologer. Incidentally, Stephen Forrest has been a great supporter, a big fan of my New Age Noir series, has written good reviews and spoken about it in his many classes, and I'm very happy about that, to get some sort of public endorsement of it.
Yeah, he's a fantastic guy. Very warm man who is very warm in spirit and body and mind. I think he exudes a great sense of spirituality there at his core. I've had him on several times. He's a great guest as well. It's interesting that you've sort of been able to dovetail this idea, and I'm surprised more people haven't done it myself, because astrology does have that natural, as I mentioned, foundation, quality to the character. And of course, you can get into. It was a book written just a while ago called The Luminaries by a woman out of Australia, which delved into each character was a specific sign, and it's a fascinating story. I think her name is Elizabeth Caton, or I'm pretty sure that's it. and also a fascinating read that weaves astrology into it. And actually, I think won the Booker Prize in England, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, I've got that sitting here in my library, and I've been meaning to read it because I want to write, a fairly detailed review of it for an astrological publication, let's say. I know somebody did one a few years ago. Brian Clark, I think, in Australia, wrote a review of it, but it was not very extensive. I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, it's quite a book, and I'll tell you, I found it to be so complicated that I had to keep notes while I was going simply because of the details. And it's just fascinating. I mean, if you have the mind, as you obviously do for astrology, you understand the complexities and the interrelationships, but it really was a fascinating romp, and really very, very cleverly put together by a woman who is not an astrologer per se. So I think that's even more fascinating in itself. Well, when you talk about the precision of Vedic astrology, and do you also apply that, or can you apply that in your views to mundane events of nations and people such as that, or events? And in Western astrology, we cast charts for nations and entities, and you can do the same thing for Vedic astrology, and you find out much there. Have you done that for Canada or for the United States?
I used to do that when I was very interested in mundane astrology. It was when I was still a Western astrologer. After becoming a Vedic astrologer, frankly, I never pursued that. I mean, although theoretically it's possible, and yes, people do it, and yes, I own a book or two on what is called mundane astrology from a Vedic perspective. But I personally have not, pursued that because why God invented time, right? So that everything couldn't happen at once. So, I don't have the time to do everything. I don't even have all the time I need to do all the things I want. God help me. So, that's just one of those things that went to the back burner for me. Nobody pays you to do this. People will pay me, clients will pay me to, do their chart and talk about them. And, that's what motivates me, frankly. And while do I do stuff unpaid? Of course I do. I think every astrologer does. They follow their own personal interests. But mundane astrology, I've just not covered that. Joni Patry, though, for instance.
Yeah, I know Joni, yeah.
She delves into that quite a bit, and apparently, does quite a good job of it.
Yeah, it's fascinating. There was a astrology convention, I think it was back before the election, and they had a panel of astrologers, and she was the only one who picked Donald Trump to win the election, I believe, as the story's been told. Everybody else had Hillary down as a slam dunk, and so it was interesting to have seen that. So when you look at that, when you look at the dynamics of what we're going through from your view north of the border there, how do you view the United States from that perspective?
Well, there's lots of memes on Facebook that kind of describe our situation. Here's one of them. There's a moose sitting in a inflatable a bathing pool, swimming pool in a backyard, looking across the street at a car in flames.
That seems about right. So, I mean, it must be a little scary being up there and seeing us to the south and wondering what the heck we're doing down here. Certainly is disturbing to those of us living in the midst of this maelstrom out here. I have to say that.
Well, I got to say, though, I have many American friends. I love to visit America. And I know just because this administration is a little, I don't know what the right adjective to
you can pick 1,000 of them.
Non-typical. I do not, characterize all Americans under the heading of this particular president. So, this too will pass.
This too will pass.
It might pass like a kidney stone.
Right.
But it will pass.
It will pass. And thank God for term limits, that's all I can say. Thank God they took that into account back in the day. Getting back to the astrology piece, when you look at the construct of Vedic astrology, and during the course of your studies, did you go into the historical context of how it evolved, and did you have to delve into that realm with the Vedic astrology?
Well, you don't have to. I mean,
it certainly provides a good foundation, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's good to know history, but of that, Chris, there's a lot of debate, and some academics in this field are very much in dispute about the actual antiquity of Jyotish, the actual word for Vedic astrology. and whether it predates, for instance, Hellenistic astrology or not. And, I'm not one of these experts, and, I don't need to know which came first. I know what I use, happy to use that. I'm happy to know that Hellenistic astrology, uses similar things, and whether one came from the other or were borrowed or cross-fertilized or whatever, I don't really care. So, astrology has a long history in mankind, no matter from what origins, which, the further back you go in time, the murkier that all gets. And I don't know if anybody really knows for sure. Somebody out there listening might say, yeah, I damn well know, and it's this, that, or the other thing. But, I don't know, and I don't obsess over that. I don't need to know.
Yeah, no, I can see. I mean, it's valid. It works. That's all that really matters, is that it works, and we know that, and we've discovered that. We can see that innumerable times in the courses of our days and our lives. We can see how accurate it is, and this is what I love about it, especially when you get a new client. When I get a new client and I have that session, as you were just mentioning earlier, and you know nothing about them, and you go into this long spiel, and they're on the other end of the phone or the other end of the table, and they just sit there saying, wow, how do you know this? And I think that is one of the things I love the most. I find it to be incredibly validating, instantaneously verifying, and it's a joy. It's kind of like writing HTML code. You can write the code and boom, there it is, and you can see the website live, and it has that sense of instant gratification, I think, that I enjoy so much.
Yes, I agree. I think all astrology has the potential to do that. It's only in my personal experience, comparing two methodologies over a span of 15 years in Western astrology, in professional practice, and then about 15 years now in Vedic astrology, professional practice. I've worked both sides of the street, and I can honestly say that I've been able to see things and say things about a chart using Vedic astrology that I wouldn't have had a clue how to pull that out of the chart using Western astrology.
That's interesting. When you crossed that street, how did you sort of rationalize that in your head? I mean, because you're so entrenched in one form of studying, it's almost like being a Catholic and all of a sudden converting to Judaism. I mean, how do you sort of cross that border, or maybe not Catholic, but Catholic to being a Buddhist or whatever? There's just such a mind shift in some ways. Granted, they're founded in the same sort of underlying logic, and yet there is a real disparity there. I mean, how did you make that intellectual switch?
Well, I don't think it's as hard as you might think. I lived in Montreal for about 25 years, where people speak franglais. So this is a hybrid word. Right. It's a made-up word, but it's French and English. Mm-hmm. Français, anglais, franglais. And if you hang around Montreal long enough, you will find people beginning one sentence in English, mixing up some French words in the middle, and concluding their sentence in English, or paragraphs with an English sentence, a French sentence, an English sentence, and so on and so forth. People who are bilingual just go back and forth like that seamlessly. And when the listener is bilingual as well too, whole conversations will take place like this. It's a situation I think like no other. Anyway, so when I first started doing Vedic astrology, I was flipping back and forth using Western astrology and Vedic astrology almost concurrently or contemporaneously, working its way through my mind. What will I say next? And I would say something that was based upon, a Western concept. And then the next thing out of my mouth might be something that was based on a Vedic concept. But as time went by, this was a 2-year transition, right? It was like a big ship at sea, which changed course, but it did not turn on a dime, made a big swooping curve. So in those 2 years, I made a swooping curve where I was using both. But then at the end of that turn, I had dropped the Western component, and I was using mostly Vedic concepts and techniques thereafter, and ever since. Somebody surprised me the other day, and we were talking about something personal in my life, and they said, well, no wonder this is going on for you, because you have Uranus, transiting over your Aries stellium in the 10th house. And I said, what? I don't even know where Uranus is anymore.
Right.
I mean, that's how far how far I've left Western astrology behind, but it reminded me, oh my God, I got to go back and look at this because, I should know this.
That's a fascinating analogy. I think the idea of the franglais you mentioned is a great way of depicting that, because it really is a way of thinking of two different main mindsets. And we all do this. We all bring in. I think even as astrologers, I'm always dabbling in numerology. I'm always, as you mentioned earlier, dabbling in other forms of divination, just to sort of round out and to sort of validate the underlying theme. So I think it's good to have both in your armament, so to speak, in your toolbox of astrological ideas. It's good to have all that stuff there. So we've run out of time. This has been a fascinating conversation. I knew this would go fast because I was so fascinated by all the stuff that you've done. But it's been great having you on today. I encourage all of you who are listening to check out Alan's websites. He's got two websites. One, he's sort of a dual personality, even though he's a whole person. He has the astrologer and Vedic astrologer side of him, with his website is Navamsa, Navamsa.com. And then he has the other side of himself, which is the mystery writer and everything else. And he also has his astrology books there. And that's called sextile.com, which is a very well-known aspect in astrology. So it's been great talking to you today. Alan Annand is his name. I encourage you to check out his websites and seek out a consultation. I think you'll find him to be incredibly valid and accurate and deep in his knowledge. So I appreciate very much you coming on today, Alan. It's been great speaking with you.
Chris, thank you so much for this opportunity. It's been fun.
We'll be in touch again. We'll have you back on. There's no question about it. There's so much more material here to cover. So let's stay in touch.
Okay, great. Thanks again.
You've been listening to Turning of the Wheel with your host, Chris Flisher. To schedule a reading with me or to order artwork, you may visit my website at www.turningofthewheel.com. That's www.turningofthewheel.com. Or you can call me at 978-393-1036. Thank you. And as always, be open to possibilities.